helping you with Acorn and RISC OS computing.
Everyone hear me okay? No, not yet. You can hear me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sack the technicians.
There we go. I'll just put mine. Right, let's see if this wants to work as well. Scroll over. Click. Oh, there we go. I even remembered. Oh! I got it right everywhere else. There's always one thing. There's always one bit. Shall I quickly edit it? So, hello, I'm Steve Revill from RISC OS Open, and welcome to the 2021 Wakefield show. It's also not in Wakefield.
Yeah.
So, it's parallel dimension. It's great to be here. It's great to be here in person, meeting people face to face again. Some of you will have seen the first part of this presentation, those of you who were lucky enough to be at the London show a few months ago. It's great to be back doing these things after the dreaded C word caused all the shows to stop. And we, at RISC OS Open, we entered a bit of a reflective mood off the back of not meeting the community for such a long time, and it got us thinking about why we do this, and there we go, I'll fix it. Brilliant. So we asked ourselves the question why. We were wondering about why do we do what we do, why do you guys come to these shows? Why are you interested in using RISC OS at all? Why have you come to see me talk? So there's more than just sitting behind the scenes fiddling with source code. There's a bigger picture, which is that RISC OS is a community. It's a group of interested people who use it because they feel passionately about it and they enjoy it. And there's people who develop software for RISC OS because they enjoy it. And it's either a hobby, or for some people they even manage to make some money out of it. But our job at RISC OS Open is to just try and foster the community and support it and make sure that we have a RISC OS that we can all enjoy. So it got us thinking about, well, can we be clear about our own purpose? What is RISC OS Open's purpose? So that when people come to our stand and they're saying, oh, who are you guys? What do you do? We have a nice succinct statement that kind of summarises why we exist. And we're voluntary, so we don't get paid for our time. This is a hobby for us as well. And the clue to our purpose is really in our name. It's open, RISC OS Open. We have a kind of a passionate belief in openness and transparency. We want to see that the things that are happening in RISC OS are things that people can see are happening or can input into, and it's not all being developed behind closed doors as it was in the days of Acorn. And the journey that RISC OS has been on over the last 20 years or so has been all towards openness. and that's been at the heart of what we've been doing. So here is our purpose statement. It's safeguarding the past, present and future of RISC OS for everyone. So we care about the people who use RISC OS and don't know the first thing about writing software. We care about people who write software, that release software for all those users, and we care about the people who want to work on RISC OS itself and develop it and bring it forwards. So there's lots of different aspects to it, and we try and sit ourselves somewhere in the facilitating space. So we're not actively doing all the development, we're not telling everyone what needs to happen. We're just observing and allowing the community to choose its own course. And if we look back at what RISC OS Open has done through the years, we were established in 2006. So 20th of June 2006 we were incorporated. And since that time, we have managed to work with various people, and we've managed to bring RISC OS from a closed source operating system, basically a private thing that's owned by Castle, all the way through various stages of nearly open source to truly open source. And what truly open source means is anyone can take a copy of all of the source code to RISC OS and they can publish it themselves on their own website if they really want. They can twiddle with it, they can change it in ways that they see fit, and then they can release the results of that and say, well, here's my version of RISC OS now, if they really want to. Or they can just look at the source code that we host and they can make their own changes and they can feed it back to us, and it'll make its way back into the RISC OS that everyone can download from our website. Or even other third parties like RISC OS Developments or CJ Micros will take our version of RISC OS and add their secret sauce and sprinkle a bit of extra stuff in it. So all of that work all ends up coming back into what the community uses. We have created a website which I believe is the hub of the RISC OS community now. If anyone wants to see what's going on or contribute into a conversation, it used to be that you were having all the conversations in news groups on Usenet, and nowadays we've got the rule forums on our website, and it's the place to go if you want to find the latest bleeding edge versions of RISC OS and the latest stable versions. And it's also the place where you can find, if you're interested, where all the source code is. And we have had a whole load of bounties where I think I've probably explained to you many times what bounties are, but basically it's a way of us promoting specific bits of development in and around the operating system and accumulating a little pot of money that helps pay a developer to do that work. And people in the community donate to it, and when the developer sees it's reached the amount that they're happy with, then the work gets underway. And we've had 9 successful bounties so far, so some fairly fundamental and useful things have been developed, and there's another 4 bounties currently in progress. So it's never stopping. We have made 6 what we call stable releases of RISC OS. So since it went from fully closed source to kind of under our guidance, there have been incremental versions of RISC OS 5 that have come out. We're currently on stable release 5.18. And we typically see, we ideally hope to release a new stable version every 18 months. And in the real world that translates as about every 2 years. So every couple of years you'll get the next one. And incidentally, the last stable release was about 18 months ago. And we also pulled together a community effort amongst all the developers in RISC OS, which was called NutPy, which has now been merged into a thing called Epic, which is taking all of RISC OS, putting it onto a little SD card, and piling in a load of third-party commercial software for a massively reduced price. So on the Epic, you just get one SD card, and you've got a whole load of third-party software and everything ready to work out of the box to plug into a Raspberry Pi. So you buy your Raspberry Pi from somewhere, you buy Epic from us, and you've got a modern RISC OS experience. And quite a lot of the proceeds of that are just carved up amongst the people who contributed their software to it. And then we've also been working our way through lots of books, so we're creating a publishing empire of old Acorn books that are gradually being modernised. So we've got the Style Guide, the BBC Basic Manual, we've got the User Guide, which was a big community effort, which is itself open source now. And we have other books that we have been working on to do with the development tools. And we have a lofty goal of getting all the programmers' reference manuals, which is about that thick, updated. But that will take quite a bit more time of bounty collecting money, because it's a huge amount of work to do that. And the development tools that we sell are about 4 times cheaper than they used to be when they were sold at Acorn. And we've continually been updating them. And there's some stuff I'll talk about later today, which is of interest to particularly basic developers, which is the latest thing in DDE. And finally, RISC OS will still proudly run on lots of old versions of the Archimedes era computers, all the way through to the latest Pi 400. So maintaining that past and the present and looking ahead to the future is a big part of what we're trying to maintain. So we're quite careful to avoid putting changes into RISC OS that's going to make it suddenly stop working for a slice of the community. If we look at the figures of people that are downloading RISC OS, we see probably the second largest chunk of the community is downloading for IOND, which is basically the RISC PC. So the largest chunk is Raspberry Pi, and then the next largest is RISC PC. So you can't discount the fact that that's still a huge chunk of the community. So looking at the present, the things that are currently going on is, if you go to our website, you can get the latest version of RISC OS, which is not necessarily a stable build. It's not got that moniker, but it is actually generally quite stable. So most people just randomly take a nightly build every so often and just use that without problems. But caveat emptor. So these are automatically built. They just look at what's in the source tree every day and they just build it and then publish the results on the website. So it gives you early access to everything that's being developed right now. We also, I said we've got some bounties open. Looks like we can't count. Oh, we can count. Oh no, we can't. So there's 5 actually. So it looks like we've got the filing system bounty, which is about modernising the filing system so you can use big hard drives and you can have multiple partitions on hard drives, which will be very welcome. We're also looking at reuniting all of the Toolbox development that happened on the RISC OS 5 side of the world with all of the Toolbox development that happened on the RISC OS 4, RISC OS Ltd side of the world. So we're gradually pulling together all of the good stuff that happened on RISC OS 4 and bringing it into our version of RISC OS. There's a load of interesting things happening with Paint. It's being vastly improved at the moment. You can get hold of beta copies of that as well, so you can have a play. And for developers, there's a native RISC OS Git client, which sounds rude, but Git is the tool that is used to store the source code, and it's basically industry standard. And we have work happening on that at the moment. And we also have some work around modernising the network stack, which is adjacent to and not the same as the stuff that RISC OS development is doing along those lines. And there is a related part of our website where you can go and peruse all the sources and bamboozle yourself if you're interested in that sort of thing. And finally, there's lots of things happening around desktop experience. So we talked about Paint, but there's all sorts, and Toolbox, there's all sorts of other little bits and pieces being tweaked. We want to maintain consistency. We don't want to revolutionise the OS so you can't recognise it, but we are gradually making lots of little tweaks here and there to improve quality of life. So, a bit more detail about what's going on right now. We are starting the march towards releasing the next stable release of RISC OS now. So RISC OS 5.30, we're aiming by the end of this year to have that released. And the process we're going to go through with this is we're going to announce on the website, on the wiki, the list of the new features that are going to, we're trying to get into this stable release. And that way we'll allow people to interact with that a little bit and say, oh, by the way, can we have this as well? So there'll be a period of consultation to arrive at the definitive list of what's going into 5.30. And then at that point, when we've decided, we'll stop all feature development on 5.30. So we can just say, right, this is the set, let's just make sure it all works properly so we can call it stable. And at that point, we'll start doing regular release candidate builds. So you'll be able to download, this is a release candidate of 5.30, try it out and see how it works. And there'll be another bit on the website that just has traffic lights for each of the main platforms. So RISC PC, Raspberry Pi, all of the other ones, BeagleBoard even, will have traffic lights that says how stable that platform is. If it's got some serious problems, obviously red. If it's okay but it's a bit lumpy, amber. And if we're not finding any problems with it, green. And so the idea is by the time we've got to the point where pretty much all of the platforms are looking green, that's the time we'll throw the switch and say, right, good, RISC OS 5.30 is ready, and we'll release it. And then, of course, all the nightly builds will switch to being 5.31. The other thing going on, we have had some work on the DDE, the development environment, specifically around ABC, the basic compiler. So this has been updated to support what's called the VFP, vector floating point. So it basically means it can crunch through floating point numbers far, far faster on modern hardware than you could natively do. So if you have a basic program that does lots of floating point maths, and we have an example on our stand, some ray tracing, using ABC to compile your basic program will make it run far faster. And there's been lots of other work on ABC just to make it a bit better. So you can get it in our latest DDE that we're selling on the website. But I can also note that there's a guy in France called David Foodie. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. David actually bought a whole load of copies of the DDE from us so that he can give them away. And it's basically the basic version of the DDE, so it's a cut-down version of the DDE. But if you're interested in having a play with that stuff, and you're a basic developer, you might want to speak to him because you could get it for free. We also have a couple of Toolbox Gadgets, which were developed by a third party about 10 years ago or so, and they're very popular and they're very useful. And we've managed to bring those into our own source tree, so they're now part of the Toolbox sources that we host. So there's a bit of work there to make them work in our source tree, but it's a gradual part of adding more and more features and functionality into RISC OS. Part of our network development, so moving all of the network stack of RISC OS into the modern era, we have a release candidate of some of the disk-based tools, the things that are in the internet for those who are interested. So if anyone wants to have a play and see how it works and give us some feedback, get in touch with us and we can give you a copy of this stuff. And we have a user interface as part of the Git client development. It's not just a command line tool, although that's a big part of using Git. There's also a graphical user interface for RISC OS that's being developed alongside it. And I can show you a picture of that for people who are excited by these things. It's gradually growing functionality, but you can see the history. You can pick a branch for a pile of source code, You can see all of the different things that happened on that branch, all of the different changes that people made, and then all of the explanation that they put in their comments about what the change was, who it was, when they did it, which files were impacted by the change. So it's all very useful. People who like developing, hopefully this will be a useful addition to RISC OS, especially as all of the sources are hosted in Git. So if you want to interact with them, you'll be able to do it through this. Finally, looking ahead, there's some big ticket items that we believe that RISC OS needs to address over time to keep it moving forwards. And one of them is supporting multiple monitors, and there is actually some work happening in that area. And I think this is just taken as normal now on most other systems. You just expect, like now, I expect to be able to plug in another monitor and just get two displays. So having this work properly in RISC OS is something that we believe is quite important to the whole experience. We also want to see some specific enhancements to RISC OS. We want to modernise, to BASIC, we want to modernise it. So things like structure support, in particular structure support, but there's a few other things that we'd like to do to modernise BASIC. And we've actually been in conversations with various people. Paul Fellows is one of them, who's the author of ABC, the compiler, and Sophie Wilson, who's basically the creator of BASIC. We've been talking to her a lot about it as well. So lots of good ideas there. We'd like to see, this is quite technical, but basically this is about moving towards modern architectures and allowing RISC OS to address big bits of RAM, lots of memory. We also believe nearly all processors in modern computers have multiple cores nowadays. RISC OS, like the Raspberry Pi, it's got 4 cores, and RISC OS is largely running on just 1 core, and the other 3 cores are sat there twiddling their thumbs, doing nothing. So if you want to really make RISC OS run nice and fast, even faster, then having those other 3 cores doing things that are useful seems like a good addition. It's quite a fundamental thing. It's quite hard to make RISC OS do this, but there is work happening along this line as well, which is only going to get more important because processor manufacturers aren't ramping clock speeds up every year as much as they used to. They're just chucking more cores into their processors. Vector floating point, there's some work happening in BASIC I just told you about, but vector floating point is like what FPA used to be in the old days. So it's basically doing floating point maths in the silicon nice and quick. So having more and more support across RISC OS for VFP is important. So it just is another performance boost. And finally, the biggie, if you look on ARM's website at all the different ARM cores that you can license, there's a list of, I don't know, it might be about 20 odd. And if you look at what their feature set is, you can cross out probably 12 of them because they no longer have 32-bit addressing mode. So we're already at the tipping point now where more of their cores will not run RISC OS than will run RISC OS. And it's only going to decrease. So the era of 32-bit code, which was introduced, I think, around the StrongARM days, is coming to an end. And all cores are moving towards 64-bit nowadays. And that's a fundamental rewrite of probably 2/3 of RISC OS. So that's a lot of work. I was speaking to one of the other rule guys a couple of days ago about this, and we both had guessed independently about the kind of development effort to do this, and we both came to the conclusion it was about £1 million worth.
Now the RISC OS development's TCP/IP stack is out in the wild, what's your work on TCP/IP doing?
We've just got a different approach. So we're continuing with it,
Do we need 2 approaches? We haven't got enough programmers for one.
Well, ours is underway anyway, and RISC OS developments have one that works differently to ours. And we have no objection to both existing, and we'll see which ones work best for everyone, and then we can make our choice. But really, we were already quite a long way down the road of doing what we did. So we opened the bounty, I think, in 2018, and we opened it for everyone to get involved with and talk to us about. And then we opened it for everyone to claim. And for whatever reason, our work happened, and then we found out that the RISC OS work. So we're quite a long way down the road, as you can see. And I think there's a few philosophical differences about the approach we've taken. So we have been speaking to Rod about theirs, and we have now got all the source code to it, so we can have a look at it. And we'll look to see whether there's ways we can kind of bring the two ideas back together. But one of the things we're certainly looking at doing is getting their source code hosted in our GitLab. But there's still probably quite a few things that isn't there in what Rod has done, which we believe is the bigger picture to all of the network stack stuff, the stuff that we've outlined in our bounties. And that's not really been addressed by what they've done. They've done some of it, but not all of it. So it's on us to continue what we're doing to refine the work that we're doing, but B, continue working with RISC OS developments to make sure we just don't end up with a world where there's just 2 forks. So it's a complicated path to tread.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question.
One more.
So Brian preempted me there on TCIP, but,
Yep.
But your point around open source anyway is that there can be people who go off and do their own thing. But still on the bounties, there's the USB stack that is sadly lacking at the moment and stuck in USB 2.
Yep.
And the bounty is ramping up on that. Is that something that's another one of those priorities, or with modern machines that may have SATA included as an interface, that might not be required?
I think, so the question is the USB bounty, is it something we really want to push?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. I think we prod various people every so often behind the scenes, developers that we know, and see if they're at the right point in their lives to tackle some of these things. Because usually you're looking for a window of opportunity where their day job isn't consuming their life, or being a parent or something like that. So the USB bounty is one of those ones. It's not one of the huge big ticket items, but it is something we would like to see done. And you're right, it's been accumulating gradually, more and more money in the bounty. So I don't think we're that far away from reaching a tipping point with that one, because there's one person in particular that we've got our eye on, who has previous history with RISC OS's USB stack, and we've been talking to him over the last year or so, and we may or may not be getting close to an answer there. Great. Well, thank you everyone, and thanks. It was great to see you all in person. So.